everyone, it's Daz, and this week's discussion is on negativity bias and why people tend to gravitate towards bad news and focus on it.
Friends, the entire world is experiencing food shortages. Supply chain breakdowns continue to have a domino effect on everything, especially food production. Farmers can't plant as many crops now because of fertilizer shortages, forced regulations, and high fuel prices. This will cause more painful food shortages when we run out of food we're eating now. Food takes time to grow, so when farmers don't plant, months later we don't eat. That's why you need to prepare for an increasing number of food shortages, and the best way is to invest in ready our emergency food from My Patriot Supply. It's a perfect hedge against skyrocketing prices and shortages. Right now, save $50 on a 4-week food kit from My Patriot Supply. Go to preparewithdaz.com and get your $50 savings on 4-week emergency food kit that average over 2,000 calories per day. That's preparewithdaz.com. Those who know what's coming are getting prepared now. Shouldn't you? preparewithdaz.com.
Have you ever wondered why it seems that bad publicity seems to be more catchy to some than good stories? Why there's just so much doom and gloom? Why gossip is so prevalent? There is a scientific reason this is the case, and when you take a look at it, this is known as negativity bias. Negativity bias is our tendency not only to register negative stimuli more readily, but also to dwell on these events. It's also known as the positive-negative asymmetry. This negativity bias means that we feel the sting of a rebuke more powerfully than we do feel the joy of praise. The psychological phenomenon explains why bad impressions can be so difficult to overcome and why past traumas can have such a lingering effect. In almost any interaction, we are more likely to notice negative things and later remember them more vividly. As humans, we tend to remember traumatic experiences better than positive ones, recall insults better than praise, react more strongly to negative stimuli, think about negative things more frequently than positive ones, respond more strongly to negative events than to equally positive ones. For example, you might be having a great day at work when a coworker makes an offhand comment that you find irritating. You then find yourself stewing over his words for the rest of the workday. When you get home from work and someone asks you how your day was, you reply it was terrible, even though it was overall quite good despite any negative incident. This bias toward the negative leads you to pay much more attention to the bad things that happen, making them seem much more important than they really are. What research says. Research has shown that across a wide array of psychological events, people tend to focus more on the negative as they try to make sense of the world. We tend to pay more attention to negative events than positive ones, learn more from negative outcomes and experiences, make decisions based on negative information more than positive data. It is the bad things that grab our attention, stick to our memories, and in many cases influence the decisions that we make. Motivation. Psychological research suggests that the negative bias influences motivation to compare a task. People have less motivation when an incentive is framed as means to gain something than when the same incentive will help them avoid the loss of something. This can play a role in your motivation to pursue a goal rather than focusing on what you will gain if you keep working towards something. You're more likely to dwell on what you might have to give up in order to achieve that goal. When it comes to bad news, additionally, studies have shown that negative news is more likely to be perceived as truthful. Since negative information draws greater attention, it also may be seen as having greater validity. This might be why bad news seems to garner more attention. Examples of negativity bias. You received a performance review at work. This was quite positive overall and noted your strong performance and achievements. A few constructive comments pointed out areas where you could improve, and you would find yourself fixating on those remarks rather than feeling good about the positive aspects of your review. You feel upset and angry about the few critical comments. You had an argument with your significant other, and afterward you find yourself focusing on all your partner's flaws instead of acknowledging the good points. You ruminate all over all their imperfections. Even the most trivial of faults are amplified, while positive characteristics are overlooked. You humiliate yourself in front of your friends years ago and can still vividly recall the event. You find yourself cringing with embarrassment over it, even though your friends have probably forgotten about it entirely. Where negativity bias comes from. In early human history, paying attention to bad, dangerous, and negative threats in the world was literally a matter of life and death. Those who were more tuned to danger and who paid more attention to the bad things around them were more likely to survive. This meant that they also were more likely to hand down the genes that make them more attentive to danger. Research suggests that negativity bias started to emerge in infancy. Very young infants tend to pay greater attention to positive facial expressions and tone of voice, but this begins to shift as they near 1 year of age. Brain studies indicate that around this time, babies begin to experience greater brain responses to negative stimuli. This suggests that the brain's negative bias emerges during the latter half of a child's first year of life. There is some evidence that the bias may actually start even earlier in development. One study found that infants as young as 3 months old show signs of negativity bias when making social evaluations of others' responses. Neuroscientific evidence has shown that there is greater neural processing in the brain in response to negative stimuli. Studies that involve measuring events relate brain potential ERPs, which show the brain's response to specific sensory, cognitive, or motor stimuli, have shown that negative stimuli elicit a larger brain response than positive ones. In studies conducted by the psychologist John Cacioppo, participants were shown pictures of either positive or negative or neutral images. The researchers then observed electrical activity in the brain. Negative images produced a more strong response in the cerebral cortex than positive or neutral images. While we may no longer need to be on constant high alert as our early ancestors needed to be in order to survive, the negativity bias still has a starring role in how our brains operate. Research has shown that negative bias can have a wide variety of effects on how people think, respond, and feel. Some of the everyday areas where they might feel the results of this bias include the relationships, decision-making, and the way you perceive people. Relationships. The negativity bias can have a profound effect on your relationships. The bias might lead people to expect the worst in others, particularly in close relationships in which people have known each other for a long time. For example, you might negatively anticipate how your partner will react to something and go into interaction with your defense already on high alert. Arguments and resentment are often the result. When it comes to relationship, it's valuable to remember that negative comments usually carry much more weight than positive ones. Being aware of how your own tendency to fixate on negative is also important. By understanding the natural human tendency, you can focus on finding ways to cut other people a break and stop expecting the worst. Decision making. The negative bias can have an influence on the decision-making process. In their famous work, Nobel Prize-winning researchers Kahneman and Tversky found that when decision-making people consistently place greater weight on negative aspects of an event than they do on positive ones. This tendency to overemphasize the negative can have an impact on the choices that people make and the risks they are willing to take. When imagining scenarios involving either gaining a certain amount of money or losing the same amount of money, the risk of loss tends to loom larger in the person's mind. People often fear the consequence of negative outcomes more than they desire the potential positive gains, even when the two possibilities are equivalent. People have a stronger negative reaction to losing $20 than the positive feeling they have of gaining $20. When forming impressions of others, people also tend to focus more on negative information. For example, studies have shown that when given good and bad adjectives to describe another person's character, participants give greater weight to the bad descriptors than forming a first impression. How to overcome negative bias. The negativity bias can take a toll on your mental health, causing you to dwell on dark thoughts, hurt your relationships with loved ones, make it difficult to maintain an optimistic look on life. Fortunately, there are steps you can take to change your thinking and to fight the tendency toward negative thinking, including stop negative self-talk. Start paying attention to the types of thoughts that run through your mind after an event takes place. You might find yourself thinking things like, I should have done that. The negative self-talk shapes the way you think and feel about yourself and others. Reframe the situation. How you talk to yourself about events, experiences, and people plays a large role in shaping how you interpret events. When you find yourself interpreting something in a negative way, or only focusing on the bad aspect of the situation, look for ways to reframe the event in a more positive light. This doesn't mean ignoring potential dangers or wearing rose-colored glasses. It simply means refocusing so that you can give fair and equal weight to good events. Establish new patterns. When you find yourself ruminating on things like look for uplifting activity, pull yourself out of the negative mindset. For example, if you find yourself mentally reviewing some unpleasant event or outcome consciously, try to redirect your attention elsewhere. Engage in an activity that brings you joy. A few more ideas to get your mind off negative thoughts. Go for a walk, listen to upbeat music, read a good book. Savor positive moments. Because it takes more for a positive experience to be remembered, it is important to give extra attention to good things that happen. When negative things might be quickly transferred and stored in long-term memory, you need to make more of an effort to get the same effect from happy moments. So when something great happens, take a moment to really Focus on it. Replay the moment several times in your memory and focus on the wonderful things that memory evokes. A happy word from Very Well. The negativity bias can have a powerful impact on the behavior, but being aware of it means that you can take steps to adopt a more positive outlook on life, taking a more mindful approach that involves being aware of your own tendency toward negativity and consciously elevating happier thoughts to the forefront of awareness. This is one of the best ways to combat negative bias. Ruminating on the negative can take a serious toll, so taking steps to combat the bias can play a role in boosting your mental well-being. So I wanted to share that article, but I also wanted to give my own thoughts on why we tend to gravitate toward the negative. I would say it's also a part of man's fallen nature in a way, and unfortunately it is a curse from the garden whenever Adam and Eve first sinned. And unfortunately, this is something we have to fight with our flesh about. When it talks about in Romans being conformed to the image of Christ, I believe it goes beyond just acting and looking like Christ. It's also thinking and believing like Christ. And one thing I know from the fruits of the Spirit is that God's plans for you aren't to see you suffer, to have you ruminating on dark thoughts, to have you in fear, to have you not forgiving others, having you always expecting the worst. It's so important that when we do find ourselves having these anxious thoughts, that we're not growing anxious, that we understand that God will provide, that we also practice gratitude. Gratitude's a great way to pull you out of negativity. Like, say you're going through a heartbreak. If you make a list every day of things you're thankful for, like your home, your car, the food you eat, your health, it can be very bare basics, like I'm glad that I can walk. This will help also put you in a better state of mind and raise your frequency, and you'll find yourself being in a better mood. Also, when negative events happen with other people, don't take it personally. Sometimes people are stuck in their own negative loop, and unfortunately they lash out at others because they're on the defense because of this very issue of negative bias. I also find that sometimes situations where people weren't so nice to me changed because I chose to reframe the way I saw the situation, reacted to the situation. I'm also a believer in revision when it comes to manifestation and the way we think. So even if something was traumatic in my past or something is traumatizing in my present, I tell myself that no, this is all going to work out, or everything has always been good. Even if it seems delusional, I do think part of being happy is to be delusional. Not delusional in a way where you're so out of touch reality, but delusional in the sense that you're so happy even when it doesn't make sense. You choose joy even when it's chaotic. You choose to be in a good mood even when it doesn't seem like the natural or normal thing to do. It is possible to rise above the things that happen to us and our circumstances. I really believe that our surroundings, our 3D circumstances do not matter. It's what we believe and what we have faith in that truly matters. I hope that you found this word of encouragement inspiring. Let me know if you have any questions or comments in the comment section, and we'll talk about it Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, God bless.